Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a ridiculous trespassing Karen called the police on me when I caught her trespassing on my private property. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. The title story starts like this. When I first viewed the house, I did see the woman that I will call Karen from here on. She lived next door after all, so it's not weird that I saw her as she was getting into her car to leave. She saw me and stopped what she was doing for a few moments. I assumed she wanted to come to see someone who may end up being her next door neighbor. Something nagged at me about this interaction, but I brushed it under my mental rug for now and figured if it was important it would turn up later. Well, the first viewing turned into further viewings, into negotiations, and finally into me moving into my new home. Karen showed her face a few times, but the previous residents of my home promptly ignored her. I asked why, and they said that she has been a bother at times in the past, but never anything too significant. They suggested that ignoring her would be the most effective method of being rid of her. I again did not let this bother me. Most often the only neighbors you consistently even see the faces of are those that you go out of your way to. I cannot imagine she could end up being that noticeable if I just went about my life. Now, an important bit of context here is to understand the layout of my neighborhood, just the basics at least. It is a comfortable little slice of suburbia in a mostly quiet satellite city. I work in the city, but ever since 2020 and its unspeakable horrors, I work from home more days of the week than I work in the office. My home is situated near the border of my neighborhood and is backed up to a street that has a church, a school, and the bank that Karen apparently works at. She has a car and I've seen her drive it enough on weekdays, but there are plenty of days that I will also see it sitting in the driveway. Especially in the early weeks after the move, my schedule is all over the place and I actually have to drive into the office every day in the first 2 weeks because I had some issues with transferring the ISP services to my name. Because of this, I did not think that there was anything notable to those days. The car was in the driveway at odd times though. Then one Sunday morning, I'm making coffee and see something out my window. Karen is strolling across my yard in a garish dress with a clutch purse. She goes through the gate at the back of the yard and then disappears. I shake my head and dismiss it as an early morning lack of clarity in what I was seeing. I stayed near the windows facing the backyard for the next few hours though. The next time she went through, I couldn't dismiss it quite so easily. By this time I fixed up my internet and I'm back to working from home. Which by the way is perfect because it means that I'm preparing breakfast at the perfect time on weekdays to catch her walking across my backyard in her bank uniform. Not just once in the morning and once in the evening, but an extra round trip at lunchtime. Honestly, I'm mostly just flabbergasted at the idea of doing this type of trespassing to a complete stranger's property. She was so blatant that I had to assume she had no clue that she was doing anything wrong. I give her a few days just to establish the consistency that makes it clear that this is no weird fluke. I even keep a close eye out to make sure that her car still works considering she is still driving it multiple evenings and over that weekend. Monday, I make sure I'm up and ready early. I had to actually get ready to see other humans on a day when I was working from home, so admittedly I was annoyed when I went out there. So imagine I'm waiting in the backyard sipping on coffee when she enters my yard. I expected a double take or some sort of reaction, but she simply walked up and stood facing me after I got up from my chair. "Good morning, OP. Karen, why have you been cutting through my yard?" She shrugged. "Oh, it's nothing. The previous residents let me do it since it's so easy for me to get to work this way, and my fence does not connect to the outside of the neighborhood. It's just a shortcut." I knew from their reaction to Karen that the previous residents were not letting her take a daily stroll through their yard. Especially since they had a kid and there were clear signs of jungle gyms and play areas in the backyard. Well, that may have been the case with them, but I would prefer you to abstain from trespassing now that the property is mine. I don't care much what you prefer. I'm not doing anything harmful to you, so I'm not doing anything that you can stop me for. I was in awe of her audacity to reply like that, and as stated before, I was annoyed, so I snapped just a bit. Well, I happen to know that I can. I ushered Karen away from my yard and she humored me well enough that day, and her car was missing from the driveway for the first half of the day. It showed up at lunchtime and didn't leave again that day. I knew what this meant, but I had let my guard down upon seeing her drive to work first thing that morning. So I figure I'll give the previous resident's advice a try. I purchased a lock for my gate and avoided paying any attention to my backyard at those regular times I had grown quite used to. I did not do it intentionally, but looking back, it was obvious enough that I avoided checking at any of those specifically regular times. A week or so later, I was finally feeling situated and the weather was good. So I decided I would spend some time in the backyard practicing putting for frisbee golf, which I've played for years. Shock struck through me when I heard the gate open behind me. I had relegated it to the back of my mind with a lock there, but I turned to find it opening and shutting behind Karen. She froze when she saw me, then walked over like she had a stick straight up her rear. "I don't appreciate you trying to keep me from having a convenient work commute. I have grown used to it since the previous residents allowed it, and I cannot understand why you're being difficult. Are you really chastising me for installing a lock on my personal property? You come into the neighborhood and spend your time lazing around the house, and you have the gall to try to get in my way while I'm keeping the workforce moving?" I scoff but decide it's not worth trying to explain my lifestyle to someone so obviously stuck in the last century. "I don't want you on my property anymore, Karen. What did you do to my lock, by the way?" "I had a friend of mine remove it because it cannot be legal to close off access to important business and properties." "Well, Karen, it's perfectly legal to put a lock on a gate on my own property. And if you don't find a different way to work, then I'll be forced to call the police on you for your continuous trespassing." "Oh, I'm so scared, I'm gonna cry," she scoffed. "You're not gonna call the cops on me." In fact, she perked up with a new idea and then got her phone out and said, "I'm gonna call the police to tell them that you're harassing me." She jammed her fingers into her phone for a quick few buttons, and then when she actually heard the emergency operator pick up and ask her if she needed help, she seemed to panic. She checked the time and tried to dismiss the issue to the operator and scurried over to her home. I went to check on the lock once she left and found that it had been hammered to the point where I'm amazed it even passed as a lock from a distance instead of a random lump of metal. I ended up replacing the lock and installing no trespassing signs on the fence. She did not let this stop her ridiculous behavior, and I found that it wasn't worth putting money into new locks only to find them blatantly destroyed from that point on. I finally called the non-emergency police line and reported all this trespassing activity. I had a cop come out and take my statement. I showed him the damaged locks and made it clear that if she had complied with my wishes I wouldn't have had an issue, but she insisted on continuing with her actions when it was blatantly obvious I wanted her to stop. He took the report down with the frivolous attitude that makes it clear that nothing is gonna get done. Whether this was because they thought I was in the wrong to put my foot down, or because he simply was in the habit of not listening to women's complaints, I was furious, but when the cops fail you, it's hard to know exactly what to do. When the cops continued to take no actions, I installed security cameras. Like clockwork, I got notifications. Karen was crossing my yard day in and day out in the most blatant and disrespectful disregard of my wishes. I gave her 2 weeks to establish the clear schedule and filed for a restraining order. I even used the busted locks as proof of harassment. Cops came out to my place again, and these two actually seemed sympathetic for once. They wanted to go question Karen and I wanted to be there. I followed them and had my phone out ready to record so I could get Karen's full and exact statement on camera, just like all her walks through my backyard. The video recording did not do much because I only barely managed to press start recording before Karen had made it past the two men and started battering me with her fists. I dropped the phone and it just heard her cursing at me while I was stunned to mostly wordless grunts, and the cops were doing their best to separate the frantic woman from me. Listening back to the recording revealed some information I had not been aware of, though I had some odd feelings of déjà vu. It all went back to that first encounter when she stared as if she knew something or had something she wanted to tell me. I'd let the itch go unscratched, and now I realized how many issues I had let fester by doing that. Some of the statements she threw out in her assault were referring to events from years ago that I'd largely forgotten, but Karen hadn't. When I saw her after all these years, changes in lifestyle with plenty of fines and a divorce made her nearly unrecognizable. Years ago, I had been living in the city when an elderly neighbor of mine was constantly reporting issues to our landlord. This landlord was a real piece of work and ignored the old man's complaints, but I did what I could to help. I ended up being there to call the cops on Karen when she had similarly attacked the old man, but I was very distanced from those events and really did not know what happened past the arrest. I moved a short while later and now I find myself to be a victim of the same crimes. I immediately do what I can to find a lawyer and bring her to court. The case is pretty much open and shut. Between the logs, the footage and the audio recording that is corroborated by police witnesses, everything is just stacked against Karen and her own demands that what she had done should not be considered an issue. The past legal offenses of Karen had not resulted in anything beyond the fines and strain in her marriage that were previously mentioned. Still, they were a spectacular help in making sure that this time there would be more serious punishments. The ongoing history made even a few misdemeanor occurrences enough to incur 6 months in county jail for Karen. A restraining order was so easy to get out of the judge, it almost made up for how impossible it was to coordinate and get one approved before the situation made its way to a physical altercation. I had not known it at first, but she was only renting the house next door. The 6 months in jail were more than enough time for the owner to justify breaking off the lease and renting it out again so that I did not have to put up with Karen as a next door neighbor any longer. I have befriended my neighbor and we both work from home. This means that we'll often spend our breakfast together in PJs just to have some human conversation before heading back to our computer. And we do this in each other's backyards, which are connected without a fence, so we can come and go as we please. Politely given privilege that grew from honest friendship and trust. What a horrible thing to ask for. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you enjoyed the title story, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe even post a comment and like the video, since that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and the next one is a revenge story. 7 years ago, I moved into a 4-bedroom house with 3 of my friends. I was the only woman among 3 dudes, one of the roommates was the owner's son, and we were all friends in college, and honestly, it was the best 2 years ever living situation-wise. We all had different work schedules, and because I worked the earliest, 6 AM, I had the only downstairs bedroom. My friend, let's call him Jay, who worked night shift and got home at 4:30 AM, had the room above me so that we didn't wake each other coming home. During the week, Jay and I would eat breakfast together before he went to bed and I went to work. We had a jar in the kitchen, we all would throw spare cash in, like $5 to $10 at a time each. That was for common groceries like milk, eggs, basic bread, and occasional house meals and beer, because we were in our early to mid-20s. The rule was always that if you used the last of the common use stuff, you would take from the jar to cover the cost and grab it from the store ASAP. When we grabbed a pizza or I'd make a meal for everyone, we used the same fund. This all is very important. About 5 months into the living situation, Jay met Karen and started dating her. He brought her to one of our game nights to introduce her to us, to get a feel for how she'd mesh with us, and all was fine when she thought that I was only the girlfriend of another roommate. Because we were playing in the dining room right by my room, Karen saw me go in that room to grab a sweater early in the night. Then she saw my roommate, the one she assumed I was dating, go upstairs to grab his phone charger. The entire vibe changed and she started to ask me who I was dating. She was floored when my roommates confirmed that I lived there, I had my own room, and I was not dating any of them. She saved face, said she was just surprised that I'd wanna live with 3 men, and we moved on. Cam, the owner's son, and I were the only ones that realized Karen saw this as a problem. After that, she started coming over right after I got off work and only leaving when Jay went to work. If I came out of my room to the living room, she would ask why I was out there. If I was going to the kitchen, she would remark that I was being disrespectful to her and Jay and interrupting their time together. Just like Disney is interrupting me. If I was talking to Jay when she got there, she would practically grind on him and shove her tongue down his throat. She even complained that I was ruining the mood for doing my laundry. Jay made it clear that he knew that she was being a problem and had started pushing for them to just chill in his room. Unfortunately, she used the opportunity to make some of the worst adult video imitation noises any of us other roommates had ever heard. We laughed it off and just left those 2 alone. After a couple of weeks, she had gotten drunk before Jay went to work and we insisted she stay in his room and sleep it off. I literally brought her food and Tylenol because the girl was gonna feel like hell in the morning. The next morning, Jay came home and started making breakfast for me and him when Karen came down and just started screaming. She woke the other two roommates up and she accused Jay of cheating, accused me of having relations with all the guys, and then made the dumbest statement possible. She demanded I pay Jay back for the food he was wasting on me. Cam literally grabbed a $5 from the jar and slapped it in Jay's hand. Cam and I had a come to Jesus talk with Jay. We both told him if she could not deal with me living there, then she could no longer come over. Jay was asked for a week to figure things out, trying to claim she was just caught by surprise when she saw him making me breakfast and not thinking clearly. We gave him a week, and in that week, mysteriously, the grocery jar was getting raided. We all noticed and talked about it. We noticed my clean dishes were appearing still clean in the sink. Little things were disappearing from common rooms and weirdly appearing in my room. Karen was being sweet, she was not exactly covert. Cam and I knew that she was sowing chaos, but being curious where this was headed, we just watched. After a week, Cam gets a call from his mom asking if I'd been going through something lately. Apparently, a concerned party had sent her picture after picture and story upon story about how I was supposedly trashing the house and stealing. Karen expected this to get me in trouble. Luckily for me though, my landlord was actually worried I was not doing okay and wanted Cam to help me get through it. Cam told me and I started planning my petty revenge. First thing I did was eliminate the grocery jar. I split up what was in it evenly between the four of us and told them that because of the raided stash I felt it needed to go away. Karen did not like this, but when asked why, she claimed it was rude for me to make a unilateral decision. Cam backed me, battle won, and then I started hanging with Cam in the living room every day. She complained, but Jay told her it's our house and we can do as we please. When she would go to the kitchen, one of us always asked what she was doing in our fridge. She stopped going in our fridge after 2 days. The weekend was here and we knew Jay had an extra overnight shift and Karen was planning to stay in his room so they could hang out the next day. Cue my biggest petty move ever. Just a little information here, Cam and I met in college where we both studied theater, specifically acting. That Friday we hung out in his room right next to Karen's. We made a bit of a show when Jay left and acted like he could not know that Cam and I were hanging out alone in his room. This caught Karen's attention. We started shaking the bed, two nerdy people hip thrusting the end of the bed to give the illusion the spicy thing was going down is quite awkward but oh so entertaining. Within minutes we got a text from Jay asking what we were doing. Cam replied, playing video games. After 10 minutes we stopped the bed shaking and actually did play video games on mute. When Jay demanded a FaceTime session, he saw exactly what he needed to see, which was me beating Cam in Mario Party. We cycled through this for a few hours. After a while, we decided to put the finishing touches on. We made a big deal about me needing to go to my room before Jay got home, and Karen took the bait. We could see the little bit of light being cut off in the slightly open door by her watching. Cam and I stage kissed and I headed to the living room. Jay came in 10 minutes later to find me watching a movie, normal for me, and asked what was up here. I told him I'd been up playing video games all night with Cam. He tells me Karen claimed we were doing the nasty things and I told him we didn't. He goes to bed and the next day Jay calls a house meeting without Karen. He tells us that she is making claims of us having a relationship and hiding it from him. We say she is full of it. We tell him about the frame job she tried to pull, how she went to Cam's mom to get me in trouble. Jay asks our other roommate if he heard anything from the bedroom. The bro does not even flinch and says, I heard, me, calling Cam her bitch and the usual Mario Party crap talk. They were not doing anything. Jay asked about the grocery jar. We all told him we suspected Karen. The next day he broke up with her for trying to turn him against us. He called her a liar and a thief. A few months later, he dated another girl. She was awesome and they are married now. I was a bridesmaid, but the absolute best part, Karen being one of the wait staff and seeing Cam with his wife and me with my fiancé, telling them the story of how we once dry humped a mattress fully clothed to get back at a thief. And yes, Jay knows the whole story and he did not mind at all. To address the reason Jay wanted to know if we were actually getting funky, he's the kind of dude that hates useless secrets. If Cam and I were actively hooking up, he would be fine with it. If we were hooking up and actively hiding it from him, like we couldn't trust him, he would have an issue with it. That was why we played hard into the Jay cannot know part. Though Cam says that Jay secretly wanted us, Cam and I, to get together, but nah, that did not happen. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I love telling this story because in addition to having an entitled Karen that I get to destroy, I also get to do one of my favorite things. That being basically the dramatic spin and be like, Karen, I am the owner. Most of the time people know who their neighbors are, so for Karen to not know might seem odd at first. The thing is that I inherited this property, and while I didn't want to move into it, I also didn't want to just sell it. I decided I would fix it up a bit and then rent it out to make some extra money on the side. I would come out to the property about once a week when I had days off work to come and fix things up. I did not hire anybody since my dad was a contractor and taught me everything he knew. I was gonna fix it myself and didn't care about all the extra time it would take me. Me showing up randomly in messy work clothing, it was really easy to mistake me for a handyman rather than the actual owner of the property. I was half expecting somebody to not know that my great aunt died and left me the house. Potentially even having the issue of somebody thinking I was breaking in, but that fortunately didn't happen. My imagination just likes running wild with these things because I read way too many stories on Reddit. Anyway, I started noticing that every week when I arrived there would be a burned pile of trash sitting on my property. I had no idea where this was coming from, and I didn't want to just start going around and accusing people. I was gonna call the town and let them know that I owned the property and kept finding the charred remains of trash in my yard. Laws are different everywhere, but where I live there is an increased chance of fires getting out of control and spreading. On top of burning trash being illegal where I am, starting an uncontained outdoor fire is also highly illegal. That call to the town didn't end up happening because the next week while I was inside working, I smelled smoke and saw fire coming from the side of my yard. I sprinted outside and saw the woman I knew to be a Karen that lived next door. My great aunt always complained about her, so I knew the type of person I was dealing with already. She had poured a bunch of trash on the ground and set fire to it. Then started dumping more on top of that, causing the fire to grow in size. I could not believe what she was doing and ran right up to her face. I have no issue being confrontational when the person deserves it. Me? What the hell do you think you're doing? Karen, minding my own business like nobody clearly taught you. Me? Well, I was taught not to dump trash on other people's property or light fires there. Karen, I know the owner of the house. She said I could dump my trash here and set it on fire to dispose of it. I could call her right now and tell her that her hired help is not doing his job. I see that you barely come out here anyway and want to take advantage of an old lady, huh? She even told me that you seem to be slacking so I could get you fired if I wanted to. Me, you do realize that even if you had permission dumping like this, it would still be illegal because of the fire and the fumes. More importantly, I know for a damn fact that the owner did not give you permission to dump on the land. I also know for a fact that you have not spoken to an old lady about the work I'm doing on this house. Karen, excuse me? The woman who owns this house is my good friend and we talk every single day. Me, then you would have known that my great aunt actually died 4 months ago and left the house to me. Tell me again how you talked to her about my renovations that didn't start until after she died. Are you able to talk to the dead, or do you just naturally look like you belong in a graveyard? She was so pissed from my comments that she spat at me and then went back into her house. I had to take a hose and put out the fire in fear of it spreading. A ton of grass was already destroyed from her various trash piles and I was pissed at her. I wanted to call the cops on her for the dumping, but my issue was that I didn't have proof. With the renovations, it really could look like I was doing it and then just blaming a random person, which I knew Karen would claim. Instead, I came up with a much more evil plan that I was pretty proud of. The first step was to install cameras on the property to catch Karen in the act of dumping. I knew she was not gonna do it after getting caught, at least right away. I didn't want to risk her waiting until after I rented the house, so I deployed part 2 of my plan. This involved me being a little piece of work and a liar. I called Karen on the phone and acted like I was sorry for the way I treated her. That my great aunt talked well of her all the time. I then told her that I overreacted and she was free to dump on my property whenever she wanted. Keep in mind, I was clear to say dump and not add the word burn or set fire to anywhere in my statement. This is important in a little bit. It only took 3 days for her to get caught on tape dumping the trash on my property and setting it on fire. I am nowhere near the property, but with my new cameras I am able to see the entire thing and call the police about it. I tell them I see from my security camera that somebody had started a fire on my property. I keep watching on the cameras and see in minutes how police and fire trucks show up on the scene, with Karen standing there like a sitting duck. She has no way out of this and gets arrested for setting the illegal fire. In court, she tried to use for a defense that I gave her permission to do these things. That is where my wording from before came in handy. I told the court that I did in fact call her up and give her permission to dump trash on my land. That I was not selling it yet, and I wanted to show that I was a good neighbor. When asked if I told her that she could burn it, I was honest and said that I never told her to do those things. If I did, then she would still be in trouble for setting the illegal fires, but I could get in trouble for being an accomplice. I technically just gave permission to dump, which had nothing illegal about it. She got sent to prison because, again, fires are a huge deal where I live. We see on the news a lot of people starting a backyard fire and it's spreading and destroying neighborhoods or going into nearby woods. Nobody is getting a slap on the wrist for a crime like that around here. That's the point I'm trying to make. It was hard to hide my smile until I was alone after court and enjoying my nice revenge. She learned that I was not only the owner, but messing with me was a bad idea. I still need to get the land cleared off and redo the grass in a few areas, but things did not end up too bad for me. It was honestly the most fun I had had since I got the property, but I wouldn't want anything else to happen. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.